The West Virginia State Hospital in Weston, known for its eerie and decaying structures, was once a psychiatric facility that housed thousands of patients for over a century. Built in 1858, it was originally intended to be a place of care, but over the years, it became notorious for overcrowding, mistreatment, and the dark practices of its staff. Patients were subjected to experimental treatments, some of which were as horrifying as the place itself. By the time it closed in 1994, the hospital had a long history of mysterious deaths, patient disappearances, and unexplained events. Many believe the souls of those who suffered within its walls still linger, their restless spirits haunting the abandoned halls.
I had always believed that asylums were places of treatment, sanctuaries where the mentally ill found solace. That belief shattered on the night I signed up for an overnight tour at the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, a decaying relic of a bygone era. The building loomed like a corpse against the night sky, its broken windows resembling vacant eyes staring into the void. The guide, a man with a lantern and a knowing smirk, warned us that some doors were to remain closed, no matter what we heard on the other side. I dismissed it as theatrics, just part of the show. That was my first mistake. As we wandered through the crumbling halls, a sense of unease settled in my chest. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something metallic, almost like blood. Our group shuffled through peeling corridors where rusted beds sat untouched for decades. We were told stories of mistreated patients, of tortured souls who never left. The deeper we ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It was as if the walls carried the weight of every scream, every tortured plea that had ever echoed through them. I must have lingered too long by one of the rusted doors because when I turned to rejoin the group, they were gone. Panic set in, instantly. I called out, but my voice was swallowed by the silence. The dim emergency lights flickered, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to shift on their own. I started retracing my steps, but the corridors twisted in ways I didn't recognize. The building itself felt alive, breathing, watching. Then, I heard it. Soft, shuffling footsteps behind me. My pulse pounded in my ears as I turned, expecting to see another visitor. But the hallway was empty. Only the echo of movement remained. I walked faster, then broke into a jog. The sounds followed, keeping pace with me. I turned another corner and slammed into a dead end. The only door there was ajar, leading into darkness. A whisper brushed against my ear. "Why did you leave me?" I spun around, heart hammering. A figure stood in the doorway, half hidden in the gloom. Its head twitched unnaturally, its limbs hung at odd angles. It stepped closer, dragging its feet against the floor, and the dim light caught its face, a gaping hole where the mouth should have been, eyes black as ink filled with a silent scream. My body froze, every instinct screaming to run, but I couldn't move. The air grew thick, pressing against my chest like unseen hands suffocating me. Then, the door behind me creaked and slammed shut. The light overhead flickered and died, plunging me into absolute darkness. My breathing came in short, panicked gasps. A sound rose from the corner of the room, a wet, gurgling wheeze. Fingers brushed against my arm. I flailed, desperate to escape, but the touch became a grip, cold, vice-like, unrelenting. Just as my vision began to blur from lack of oxygen, the door behind me burst open. I tumbled backward into the corridor, the light suddenly returning. I scrambled to my feet, heart thundering, but when I looked back into the room, it was empty. No footprints in the dust, No sign of what had been there. The hallway stretched before me, silent and endless. I don't know how I found my way back to the entrance, but when I finally stumbled out into the cold night air, I was alone. The guide and the group were gone. My phone showed a time that didn't make sense, as if I had lost hours in that place. I never went back. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. The whisper, the dragging footsteps, the silent scream waiting in the darkness. I've always had a fascination with abandoned places, the kind that carry the weight of history in their crumbling walls. That's how I ended up at Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Louisville, Kentucky, one of the most infamous haunted locations in the country. What was once a tuberculosis hospital, filled with the suffering and the dying, was now a hollowed-out corpse of a building, whispering with the echoes of those who never left. The tour was supposed to be a simple night exploration, guided by an expert in paranormal activity. But what I experienced was something no tour could prepare me for. The group was small, only 6 of us, plus the guide. We stepped through the rusted entrance, the scent of decay and dampness wrapping around us like a shroud. The walls were covered in peeling paint, the remnants of beds and medical equipment scattered like the bones of a long-dead giant. The guide led us through dimly lit halls, recounting stories of the past, patients left to die in agony, nurses who met tragic ends, and the infamous body chute, where corpses were slid down a long tunnel to keep the death toll hidden from the still living patients. Halfway through the tour, I lagged behind, drawn to a doorway that led to an empty patient room. The air felt colder inside, almost electric, like a storm brewing in a confined space. The others moved ahead, their voices fading into the distance. Then, just as I turned to leave, I heard it. A deep, rattling breath from the far side of the room. My own breath hitched. The weak beam of my flashlight swept across the decayed walls, and that's when I saw him. A figure stood near the broken window, his back turned to me. His hospital gown fluttered slightly, as if caught in an unseen draft. He was unnaturally thin, his ribs protruding, his skin a sickly gray. A choked, wheezing sound escaped his throat. Then, ever so slowly, he turned his head, but not like a normal person. His neck twisted, bones cracking until his sunken eyes locked onto mine. His mouth stretched into an unnatural grin, lips splitting as if the skin itself resisted movement. Stumbled backward, my legs refusing to move fast enough. The air thickened around me, pressing against my chest, making it harder to breathe. The thing took a step forward, and I heard a whisper, not from him, but from the walls themselves. "Join us." The words slithered through the air. And suddenly, I was no longer alone in the room. Dark figures lurked in the corners, their hollow eyes watching, waiting. The whispers grew louder, merging into an agonized chorus of voices calling my name. A hand grabbed my shoulder. I screamed, jerking away, only to see the guide standing there, his face pale. "We need to go," he said, his voice tight. The others stood behind him, their expressions confused, but I could see it in his eyes. He knew. He had seen it before. I turned back to the room. It was empty. No figures, no whispers, only the flickering beam of my flashlight illuminating dust and decay. Didn't speak for the rest of the tour. When we finally stepped outside, the cold night air hit me like a splash of water, snapping me back to reality. The guide looked at me before I left and simply said, "They always find the ones who stray too far." I never returned to Waverly Hills, But even now, in the dead of night, I sometimes hear that voice, rasping, distant, whispering my name from the darkness. I had always heard the stories about Penhurst Asylum, a place of horror and despair buried deep in Pennsylvania's history. Once an institution for the mentally ill, it became infamous for its inhumane treatment of patients. They say the walls absorbed the screams, the pain, and the suffering of the forgotten souls. When my friends Jake, Sam, and I decided to sneak into the abandoned asylum one night, we thought it would be just another urban exploration adventure. Thrilling, but ultimately harmless. We had no idea we were walking straight into a nightmare. The R building loomed in the darkness, its broken windows resembling hollow eyes staring out at us with silent malice. We climbed through a shattered window, our flashlights barely piercing the suffocating gloom. The air smelled of damp rot and something fouler, something that clawed at the edges of my senses. Peeling paint curled from the walls like withered flesh, and old wheelchairs sat abandoned in the corners as if their former occupants had simply vanished. "This place is seriously messed up," Jake muttered as we wandered deeper. Our footsteps echoed unnaturally in the empty hallways. Graffiti covered the walls, but beneath the layers of spray paint, we could still see the faded remnants of the asylum's past. Signs directing patients to therapy rooms, restraints still bolted to rusted gurneys. Then we heard it, a faint, shuffling noise. It echoed through the hallway, dragging, limping, coming closer. We froze. "Tell me that was one of you," Sam whispered, but none of us had moved. From the far end of the corridor, a figure emerged. It was impossibly thin, its head lolling to one side as if its neck had been snapped. Its hospital gown was tattered, revealing patches of decayed, ashen skin. Its arms dangled uselessly at its sides, but the moment its hollow eyes met mine, I felt a crushing weight press down on my chest. Jake grabbed my arm. "We need to go. Now." The whispers started next, soft at first, then rising into a cacophony. "Helpa, why did you leave us? Stay. Forever." The voices came from everywhere and nowhere, wrapping around my mind like icy tendrils. Sam whimpered, backing away, but the figure twitched, its limbs convulsing unnaturally, and then it charged. I don't remember what happened next. One moment I was screaming, the next I was outside, lying on the cracked pavement near the asylum's entrance. Jake and Sam stood over me, pale and shaken. "Dude," Sam whispered, "you blacked out. You were just standing there staring. We had to drag you out." I never went back to Penhurst. Whatever is in there, it isn't just a memory of the past. It's alive, waiting, searching for the next lost soul to claim. And sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I still hear the whispers, calling my name.
If you enjoyed these real horror stories and want more chilling tales, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep bringing you the scariest stories from around the world. And if you've ever had a terrifying experience, share it in the comments. We'd love to hear it if you dare.